Hi, Collette Cameron here, and this is Coffee with Collette for August. Today's topic is love at first sight. If you've been watching my posts over on Facebook, you know that I've been asking for questions, comments, those kinds of things. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and like. If you would like to subscribe, there's a subscribe button, and there's also a little bell that you can get notifications every time I put a new video up. Over on Facebook, go ahead and give me a like, a follow, a love, a little hands up, wave, whatever you want to do. That way, the more comments that happen, then the more people get a chance to see this. All right, so I have a list of questions and comments about love at first sight. Some that I came up with, some that readers have put to me. Before I dive into that topic, however, I do want to say that I have done some research on this. I've talked with numerous people. I've looked at studies. I've done numerous reader polls about this subject. Yes, I have written a couple of books, actually more than a couple, where there's been either love at first sight or love like within the first week. My most recent books, actually, The Midnight Marquis, that is a love at first sight book. And I just finished up a holiday book, Holly, Mistletoe, and Midnight Snow, for the Christmas in Cumbria anthology. My story is tied to my Chronicles of the Westbrook Bride series, and that is a love at first sight story. Of my 61 books that I've written so far, there are probably a good half dozen that are either love at first sight or love that comes pretty quickly. So for those of you that are a little bit skeptical about love at first sight, I've heard people say there's no such thing as love at first sight, it's lust at first sight. And of course, you're entitled to that opinion, but I'm going to give you a couple of examples of things that I know in my personal life that happened to people. And then we'll go through these questions, not questions, but just comments. So I do have some questions in there because I do like your feedback. So incident number one, I had a cousin. She died 20 years ago, 20-some odd years ago from brain cancer. But she and her husband got engaged on the first date. And they were happily married for over 20 years until she passed from the cancer. My own husband asked me to marry him after 2 weeks, and we were married for 40 years in April. And one of my sons, who was a complete skeptic about love, relationships, I mean, kind of like the bah humbug of romance, fell in love on his first date, and they are getting married next summer. So does it exist? I think it does. I don't think it's for everybody. I think there's more involved than just physical attraction for a true lasting experience. I have had readers, when I've asked this question before, many readers give me examples themselves personally, family members, friends. They know people that fell in love at first sight and were married in a very short period of time and are happily married now. Is that the case for everybody? No, it's not. But I do personally believe that it exists. Some of the studies that have been done show that it does exist. It's more than just, like I said before, physical attraction. There's some chemical things going on there. There's some things that happens with people's eyes, and we'll kind of discuss a little bit that later. So let's get into this, shall we? Put my glasses on so I can actually see, because at my age, I can't see the words that I write down. All right, so this is being aired on August 30th. And as I said before, the last Wednesday of every month, I will bring you a coffee with Collette. I hope that you have some kind of a warm beverage, or if it's someplace hot, you have a cool beverage that you're sipping from. I'm not having any coffee right now because I've already had too much coffee today, and I need to be able to sit still while I do this. I don't want to be bouncing all over the place. I can tend to drink too much coffee sometimes. All right, so I already said, do you believe in love at first sight? And I gave you those examples. So in the comments down there, on YouTube, you won't be able to comment and have it show up. You can comment. I go through and I edit those and I approve them, just because there's been some harassing kinds of things on YouTube previously. I haven't had any problems in many months, but just in case somebody was being naughty, please comment. And then I will go through and approve those. On Facebook, you should be able to comment and tell me, it's just simple, yes or no. Do you believe in love at first sight? If you want to give me an example, someone you know that it worked for, that would be fantastic. You want to give me an example for someone that it didn't work for? That's also fantastic, because I can use all of that stuff in my stories. Yeah, all that stuff. You know, someone that thought they were in love at first sight. I actually have a hero in my Highland Heather Romancing a Scot series. I believe it's the last book in this series. And he thought as a young man that he had fallen in love at first sight, and it turned out to be disastrous for him. So does it work for everybody? I'm going to kind of come across the board and say, no, it doesn't. Does that mean it wasn't really love? Probably. But then who am I to judge, right? All right, so what exactly is love at first sight? Is it more than love that forms quickly? Like I said before, the comments, tell me what you think. What is love at first sight? How does it happen? Is it for everybody? Is it only for a few people? Can it happen more than once? So in my opinion, and from the romances I've written and how I write it in, it's an immediate attraction that makes both parties kind of stand up and pay attention. I was just talking to somebody today, as a matter of fact, that had walked into a room a couple months ago, actually into a business, and there was a person there, and their eyes met across the room, and it was tangible. The person that was with her said, "What just happened?" I mean, they could feel it. I realize that's not the case for everybody, and I think that love at first sight, or even attraction at first sight, is probably very unique, but there are some overlapping consistencies. So it's the desire to get to know that person more. It's the desire to be with that person forever, right off the get-go. Now, to be totally transparent, when I met my husband, I wasn't thinking marriage right away. I didn't think that I loved him right away. In fact, I didn't love him at first sight. Let's be totally transparent. I don't believe he loved me at first sight, but it was very quick love. And so I'm kind of lumping that together, love at first sight or rapid love. So within, 2 weeks or a month or something. And that happens a lot in romance novels because, we have to get from point A to point B and do all the stuff in between. And sometimes we have limited page counts and we have to make sure that the romance happens. So how would love at first sight impact a romance story? Because we're supposed to have conflict. We're supposed to have drama. We're supposed to make the story intriguing so that readers want to keep turning the pages and stay up late in the middle of the night reading. So if you have immediate attraction, immediate love, what needs to also be present so that that story is believable, that readers want to keep turning the pages? Okay, hero and heroine fall in love on the first page and live happily ever after is not going to work. There's going to have to be some kind of conflict. Probably an external conflict that makes it difficult for them to get together. It could be internal conflict as well. For instance, what if one of them is already in a relationship, or already engaged, perhaps they're already married. Maybe they have a spouse that's distanced from them. Maybe they're separated. I'm just throwing scenarios out here off the top of my head. I don't have this stuff written down. Maybe there is other factors that are influencing the romance so that they not get together. So in the arc of a story in historical romance like I write, there's going to have to be some kind of conflict, some kind of barriers, something that stalls that romance. It doesn't mean that we can't keep showing the love that they, you're going to see their either internal dialogue, comments they make to other people, perhaps comments they even make to that person, but that something prevents them from actually acknowledging that love or acting on that love, coming to a conclusion at the end of the story. So there's going to be something happening in that story arc. I think it can speed the story arc up, especially in a novella. But in a longer book, you have to be really careful that you've introduced enough conflict, character dimension, character depth, other activity that is going to make that story intriguing and interesting for the readers. Because if the reader knows from page one, well, actually, if you're reading romance, you generally know from page one to the end of the book that they're going to get together, but you need to make it worthwhile for the readers to read. And if there's nothing keeping them apart, then the story can get a little dry, perhaps a little boring. Those aren't the best words to use because I know we're not supposed to talk about stories like that. But I read a story or two where it felt like the middle to the end just dragged because the hero and heroine had already gotten together and there was really nothing to keep them apart. Now, there are cases that I have read where, okay, there was love at first sight, they fall madly in love, they get together, they're married, they're a couple, and things come in after that causes extreme division. And those stories can be well-paced and can be intriguing and interesting and have a great arc depending on what the author has introduced. Next, what if only one of the characters falls in love straight off? Either they see this person and they just know over a course of, let's say, a house party or maybe even a ball, something happens and they just know that is the person for me. I do know a couple instances where people have seen somebody like walking down the hall in a high school and saying, I'm going to marry that person. And they do. I think that's pretty incredible, actually. So love is a very strange beast, in case you haven't figured that out. But back to the question. What if it's unrequited for a while? Or what if it takes one of the characters longer to acknowledge that love, understand what they're feeling as love? How's that going to impact the story? What are your thoughts about that? Should the author rush to get them together? Should you let those emotions play out? As I said before, perhaps one of them is maybe in love with somebody else. They're already in a relationship. The person that falls in love is going to have to be patient. Do they act on their feelings? Maybe they can't. Maybe it's a situation where it's a secret love. They fall in love and they love this person during like the first half of the story. And then at some point in time, something shifts, something changes. Either the other character starts to have feelings, or they realize, wait a minute, I think that person has feelings for me. But as I said, something has to shift in the course of that story so that both of the characters feel the same. Because otherwise we get to the end of the story and we have unrequited love, and that doesn't make for a happily ever after. And I want my happily ever afters. I'm not even really satisfied with happy for now. I'm so romantic that I really want the happy ever after into old age, wrinkled, gray hair. They still see each other as the most attractive person that they've ever laid eyes on, because love is what they see through. So in my opinion, yes, you can have one character fall in love straight off. I have a couple books that's happened, and they kind of are tormented as they wait for their love to acknowledge that love, for the feelings to be reciprocated. And it can take, it can look differently for each story. And I'm sure you've read stories like that. There's no, at least in my opinion, there are some formulaic romances, but I like it better when the story has some twists and turns, some things that make it unique and different. What's kept them apart? Is it internal, external? And what is unique to that character that keeps them either continuing to love this person that doesn't reciprocate their love, or they have feelings for this person eventually. It makes me think of another person I know who met someone, and he knew immediately that she was who he was going to marry. He just knew. She didn't. And it took her a few months to come to that same place. And he was just steady on, steady on, steady on. And they're very happily married. They have 4 children. But in this situation, he didn't aggressively pursue her, but he was just there. And interacted with her almost on a daily basis, and her feelings developed and grew until she realized, wait a minute, I have feelings for this person. And it flabbergasted her because she didn't expect to have feelings for this person. So I think there's another key, for lack of a better word, that wasn't really the best word, when you have characters that don't think that they can love the other person for whatever reason, whether it's physical attraction, difference in social status, different in background or customs. And so that itself is the barrier that, I can't love that person. That person is too different from me. That person is, doesn't have the same values I do. That can be a detriment to the romance. And if the person who doesn't feel the same isn't willing to change, isn't willing to let go of those things, then I think you're going to have a case of unrequited love. But if they are willing to acknowledge those feelings that are blossoming in them, and they're strong enough to work through the differences, then you're going to have a happily ever after at the end. And at least I hope you do. Let's face it, sometimes happily ever afters kind of go belly up in real life. But in romance, they cannot. They need to be wonderful at the end, and each epilogue that you write in later on, they need to still be happy, in my personal opinion. Do you think a person can fall in love at first sight more than once? And, I'm conflicted on that one, because the romantic in me thinks you should only have one person in your life that you fall in love with at first sight, and that should be the love of your life, that carries you through your whole life. We know that things happen. People don't end up together. There's deaths. There's separations, divorce in modern times, not so much in the genres I write. Divorce was very hard to come by in the Regency era, and prior to that, the Scottish, it was a little bit easier for the Scots. The church would allow it If you lived in Scotland, it was easier to get a divorce. And so that's why some people did choose to live in Scotland, because divorce was easier to come by. But in England, it was really tough to get a divorce. So the question is, answer in the comments. Do you think a person can fall in love with, or excuse me, love at first sight more than once? I don't really have an answer for that one, because the research I've done has always just talked about love at first sight. The people I've polled have talked about, it's been a single instance. I've never had anybody say yes more than once. I've never seen any studies that said yes more than once. That doesn't mean they're not out there. So I'm just asking for your opinion, because maybe someday I'll write a story where there's been love at first sight more than once. And maybe, I mean, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. Maybe I will and maybe I won't, because it's kind of a phenomenon. And I think, like anything related to love, there really is nothing concrete. There is no A plus B equals C when it comes to love. And those of you that have been in love know that. Those of you that haven't experienced love yet, you will perhaps someday experience that. Those who have had disappointments in love, you know what I'm talking about. Can a story, I'm looking at my notes here, one of the questions I was asked, with love at first sight contain enough conflict, we talked about that a little bit earlier, to give the story depth and dimension? I did talk about that earlier, but again, I'm going to touch on that again, because I think it's critical. A story with love at first sight is going to become stagnant and boring very, very quickly if all we see is the hero and heroine being in love and demonstrating that love, and everyone seeing that love page after page after page. It's not that we don't enjoy love, because we do. And it's not that we don't want to see them happy, because we do. But we're reading for entertainment, and that can get boring really quick. So I think it's critical, whatever that conflict looks like, external or internal, there needs to be a hefty dose of it. I would be so bold as to say there needs to be more conflict in those stories of some sort, so that the story has the depth and dimension that it needs to keep the reader engaged and interested to the very end. Alrighty. Along those same line, would most of that conflict be external then? Or would it be internal? Do you think that there would need to be a balance? Or do you think external conflict would play more of a factor than internal conflict in keeping the hero and the heroine apart? I think it depends on the story. If we have a hero, let's say he's a duke, and he's really committed to his responsibilities, and he knows that he needs to produce an heir, and along comes, let's say, a widow who has not been able to have children, and he falls in love with her straight off. Will his duty to his dukedom keep him from marrying her because she can't have children? Sometimes there's these internal, external things that battle each other, and the hero or the heroine has to decide what's more important. So there's all kinds of scenarios. I'm not going to try to run through all of those. Maybe you can think of a couple, 2 or 3, and jot those in the comments. Maybe you read something in another story, because we see this in historical romance. We see this in romance actually a lot. What kind of external conflict? He's sent away, and maybe he doesn't think he's ever going to come back, and he wants her to go on with her life. Maybe she has some kind of a illness or a disease, and she's not going to live very long, and she doesn't want to burden him with that illness. We see that more in contemporary romance than we do in historical romance, but certainly it could occur in historical romance. So if you can think of a scenario, I would love to see it in those comments, because I might use it. I very well might use it. I do go through the comments that you put down, and I take that stuff to heart. And when I see stuff, that a comment from you or suggestion from you that really resonates with me, I make notes. And I have, so you wouldn't want to see all the notes I have for story ideas, conflict ideas, character dimension ideas, because I'm listening constantly. I'm always hearing things that would make a story richer, and you make readers stay engaged and want to stay up and turn those pages late into the night, and it makes it hard to end at this chapter. They want to keep going. That's the kind of stories that I like to read, and that's the kind of stories I want to write for my readers, which is you. All right, up next. Are stories with love at first sight, with that love at first sight trope, less appealing and believable? And I think personally that it depends on if you believe in love at first sight. I think if it's a story that's love at first sight, or attraction at first sight, and you're someone that doesn't believe in that, you're going to have a hard time, or a harder time, I should say. It doesn't mean that you can't, in my opinion, finding the story realistic. And I think that's an important factor in all romance. Even though we know it's fiction, it has to be realistic, because I'm not writing science fiction. I'm not writing fantasy. I'm writing fiction, romantic, not really even romantic fiction. I'm writing historical romance. And so the story has to be believable. If it's unbelievable, then readers can become disinterested. It may even trigger some things in readers that the author hadn't intended to trigger. So again, my comment on that would be, I think it depends on whether you believe in love at first sight. And even if you don't believe in love at first sight, are you willing to concede that in this fictional context, it could be possible? I think there has to be a willingness to accept that. As far as the triggers go, an author doesn't necessarily know what's going to trigger a particular reader. I mean, there's some things, of course, we know, stories that contain specific things that, maybe need to have some kind of little warning in the front. But something like Love at First Sight, we have no way of knowing that. Perhaps someone had a bad experience with Love at First Sight and they are very turned off to that type of genre in the story. There's no way an author could really go through and tell every reader, well, you're going to see this, and this in this story. And so if those things bother you, don't read the story. I don't think that's our responsibility, actually. We write the story, we write it as realistically as we can for that time period. We make it as authentic as we can, but it's still fiction. This next question really made me think a little bit. I'm going to put this up here so I can see it better. Why do we crave and yearn for love and acceptance, but we also want stories chock full of suspense, conflict, and emotion? So, the average person craves love and acceptance. From the time we're little kids, we want love. As we get into our teen years, we're searching for love and acceptance. We have that yearning for a companion, a life mate that accepts us for who we are, flaws and all. And so when we have these stories where there is this immediate attraction, and this, even an opposites attract stories where you can have an immediate attraction, yet we have a hard time when the story doesn't have that suspense and the kind of emotion that we need to satisfy our need for negativity, I guess. I don't know how else to say that. So, I think that in addition to this, the conflict, there needs to be almost a suspense elements, perhaps, in these Love at First Sight stories. It makes me think of a military romance I read one time for a contest that I was judging, and military romance is not something that I read. And I was a little bit hesitant and worried that I wasn't going to enjoy the story. And I can't tell you the title. I'm sorry. I can't tell you the author's name. But I can tell you that in the case of one of the books I read, to this day, I still think about that story. It was so brilliantly written. It was definitely a love at first sight. They met, they spent the day together, they spent the evening together, and then they went their separate ways until fate, or we want to call it, brought them together in this military setting. It was an incredible story. It was so well done. And I still think about that story, how brilliant that author was. But that story had a tremendous amount of suspense and conflict and even violence. Heartache, hard stuff to read sometimes. And I think that's how the author carried it. She set it up, this beautiful first few chapters of love and understanding and compatibility, and it was just beautifully done. And then came the hard stuff. But through that, this hero and this heroine continue to think about each other and continue to want to be together, even when it looked like they were never going to be able to be together. So I think perhaps having those deep, riveting, maybe hard emotions where you want to cry or get angry with that external conflict that they can't control, and that suspense does make a love at first sight story not just more believable, but more readable. Turn the page here because I got a few more notes. As a reader, remember, any of your comments, I will come in and look at those later and I will respond to you. I can't do it while I'm doing the video because I get too distracted and I start saying things like, yeah, I agree. And the people that are watching the video are like, what is she talking about? So I'm trying not to do that while I'm actually doing this conversation, this little chat that we're having. But afterwards, I promise I will go in and take a look and respond to as many as I can because I appreciate you being here and spending your time with me. Also, sharing it, especially if you're on Facebook, share it so somebody else can take a peekaboo at it. I really appreciate it when you do that too. Sorry, I tend to talk really fast, and I think some of you have heard me talk about when I was teaching, because I'm a retired teacher. I've always talked fast my entire life, and my students were really cute because they learned to listen fast because I've always talked fast. All right, so let's go to this next question. As a reader, are you more or less likely to read a story if you know it's love at first sight? So probably from the blurb, which is also the back cover copy or the description, you will figure out, maybe they use that keyword, love at first sight. Maybe that's somewhere in the description. You'll, I don't really believe in that stuff. I might not be interested in that. Or does it make a difference at all? For me personally, it doesn't make a difference. If it's a well-written story, I'm going to read it. And for me, a well-written story is one that keeps me engaged page after page, that has dimensional characters, that occasionally throws in something unique that I haven't seen in a story before, or I see it in a different way, not really full of cliches. I'm going to read it. And, I have my favorite authors, too, who pretty much can't write anything wrong. Or I shouldn't say write anything wrong. This probably doesn't sound very nice. But I'm going to read their work pretty much no matter what. If it's the genres I like. If they switch to a really bizarre genre, that might not be the case. So in my personal opinion, it doesn't make any difference. But for you, you could say, question, would I read a romance if I knew in advance it was love at first sight? Yes or no? You can just tell me that. And I will take that into consideration. I try not to do a whole lot of love at first sight stories because there has been a lot of chatter in romance circles that readers don't like that. There's some cliches, and that's one of the things they don't like. But as I said in the very beginning of this little chat, from personal experience, people that I know, from people that I've spoken to, from studies, it does exist. It may not exist the way you think it should, or the way you have, it in your mind, but for lack of a better word, the phenomenon does exist. And then share your favorite love at first sight books or movies if you can think of any off the top of your head. I know it's hard to put you on the spot, or if not off the top of the head, you can go look one up and come back and make a comment later on, because this post will stay up like forever. I'm not going to take it down. I couldn't think of any off the top of my head. Isn't that terrible? I have a couple of my books that I mentioned to you. I know I have other books that I didn't bother going and skimming them, because I got to be frank with you. After writing over 60 books, I can't remember my stories in detail. I remember vaguely what the story's about, who the hero or the heroine is, but the actual tropes sometimes escape me. And that's over a course of about 11 and a half, well, let's see, 10, it's a little over 10 and a half years now that my first book was published, but it was written for a year before that. So, 11 and a half years. I can't remember those details. And I certainly can't remember what their eye color is, half the time what their hair color is. So I'm just being completely transparent here. Off the top of my head, I couldn't think of any love at first sights books or movies. But if you know some, let me know, because I do love that trope, and I might very well go watch that movie or read the book, because I'm always looking for a good book to read. And then I made a couple other notes this morning when I was thinking about this. How do you make love at first sight believable? Because as I said in the beginning, it has to be more than just that chemistry. What kinds of things, what kind of a connection would you expect from a hero and a heroine that would make that love at first sight more believable? I mentioned that military story where they spent the day together and they were able to talk about anything and everything. It's like they had known each other their entire life. I think that probably is one of those characteristics of a love at first sight story. The characters feel like they've always known each other, that they're comfortable together, they can share anything, they can talk for hours on end. I just watched a cute movie the other day, and I couldn't tell you the name of it. I'm sorry. Love Again, maybe? Where a gal had lost her boyfriend. He was going to be her fiance. He was going to propose. She found the engagement ring, and his mother gave her the engagement ring. Anyway, I don't want to read the whole story for you, but then she meets this new hero, and they spend all night talking and doing things. So in my personal opinion, I think there has to be a connection, a chemistry connection, a chemical connection, definitely attraction. There has to be almost like a supernatural understanding of one another. I think there's a spiritual connection that happens with love at first sight that maybe people don't even identify. as a spiritual connection. There's just something about, or even soulmates, you could get into that. You know, are they soulmates? Possibly. I mean, I'm not going to be the naysayer on soulmates either. Some people were absolutely convinced that they have a soulmate. They've met their soulmate. My son says that the woman he's going to marry, which we just adore, that she's his soulmate. They say that about each other. And they were both in multiple relationships before that. So for them, I absolutely believe that. They don't argue. They just don't. They are a match made in heaven, for lack of a better expression. And maybe that's cliche. So maybe that's what love at first sight is. Maybe it is meeting your soulmate. And maybe that match was preordained. Yes, no. I'm not going to say one way or the other. I'm not going to rain on somebody's parade who's had that wonderful connection and absolutely is living it out every single day. I also made a note here. Does it mean they have to have common values and interests? Perhaps, but then we also know in some cases where opposites will attract. But is that opposite in personality? One's outgoing, one's an extrovert, one's an introvert, but their common core values are the same. I think is probably more that kind of a connection, because if you're totally different on every single major value, major, I'm just gonna leave it at that, major value that you have, I think it would be hard to really connect with somebody and have deep discussions, because you're not going to have that commonality. That's my personal opinion. Again, my Midnight Marquee, which actually is my most recent release, is a Love at First Sight book, and my book that's going to be in Christmas in Cumbria, which is an anthology that's available pretty much everywhere right now. That'll be releasing in November. It releases in November, I'm sorry, which is tied to my Chronicles of the Westbrook Bride series. Is also a Love at First Sight story. And most of my Love at First Sights tend to be if I have a really restricted page count in a novella for an anthology. They either knew each other before, so it's a second chance, or it's a Love at First Sight because I don't have chapters and chapters and chapters to develop that romance. So there's just my little author secret for you. That's all I have for today. A little discussion about Love at First Sight. I believe in it personally. I don't think it's for everybody, honestly. That's why all of my characters in my books don't fall in love at first sight. But I would love to hear your thoughts. Answer those questions if you would. You can also tag me in your comments down there. Again, I already said share this post so more people have a chance to see it. If you're looking at it on Facebook, if you're over there on YouTube, your comment won't show up right away, but I will be going in and looking at those. And anything that's appropriate, I would be happy to approve. But just because there's been occasionally really inappropriate comments over there, I've had to go to the approving comments, and I'm really sorry about that. So far on Facebook, everybody's been ladies and gentlemen, and that hasn't been the case necessarily on some other social media platforms. So that's all I have today. I will be, let me look and see when our next meetings, not meeting, what am I thinking of? A next one will be, oh no, this is going to be tricky. It's supposed to be September 27th, but I will be in Florida September 27th, and I know that I cannot get a coffee with Collette in unless I do it like on the beach or at one of the places I'm at. So I might try to do that. I might try just to do a really, maybe at St. Pete's. I'm going to be in St. Petersburg during that time. And that day, I can't remember what my activity is that day. So maybe, or I might have to record that one early and then just schedule it to go up onto YouTube and Facebook and then come in afterwards, because I will be there. I might not be very accessible on September 27th. But either way, there will be something that goes up, either pre-recorded or me doing a real quick live. And I don't know what the topic is yet. I haven't decided on the topic yet. I do actually, you know what? Hold on, let me find my list. I have a list. What did I do with it? Give me a second here. Oh, darn, I thought it was right here. Of topics I can ask you. Well, I'm sorry, I can't find my list. I do have a list of topics. And so as soon as I know what the next topic is going to be, I'll make up a little graphic. I'll stick it up on YouTube and on Facebook so you guys know what the next topic is going to be. And then under that post, if you have questions or comments that you want me to address during the next talk on September 27th, put those in there and I will try to include them, and your name too, so you get a little bit of acknowledgement for participating with me. I really appreciate it. All right, that's all for now. Thanks so much, and you guys have a fantastic rest of your day, okay? Bye-bye now.